The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and lemon cleaner, the same combination that had lingered in my childhood home. Cassia had arranged the table with mismatched placemats, a detail no one seemed to notice. I set down the carrot cake I had picked up from the bakery on Pearl Street, smoothing the box lid as though that small act could steady me. We had gathered after church. The Rourkes, a few of Graham's colleagues, and Bryony in her crisp blouse that looked pressed by a professional hand. Conversation bounced easily. Graham's promotion, Bryony's latest committee project, Cassia's boutique posts that had gone viral. I poured coffee into mugs, listening, nodding, content to be the quiet one at the edges. Then Cassia chuckled. "You'll never be as good as my mother-in-law," she said, eyes glancing toward Bryony, who accepted the compliment with a smile that needed no words. The table erupted in light laughter, harmless on the surface, cutting beneath. My hands stilled on the coffee pot. I felt the sting sharpen in my chest, a familiar burn I had swallowed 100 times before, but not this time. I placed the pot carefully back on its tray, rose to my feet, and looked at my daughter. "Then tell her to pay all the bills," I said, my voice even, steady, as if rehearsed. "I'm not sending money anymore," the laughter faltered. Cassia blinked, caught off guard, the color rising in her face. "What bills, you?" Bryony adjusted her necklace, silent again, but her smile remained fixed. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the brass key to my bungalow on Madison Street, cool and reassuring. Whatever else slipped away, I still held that. The silence at the table thickened, and I knew the reckoning had only begun. After the lunch, the silence in my car was heavier than the drive itself. I turned onto Madison Street, past Skinner Butte, and thought of how many years had slipped by in the same rhythm work, sacrifice, silence. When my husband's logging accident left me a widow at 32, I worked double shifts at the clinic downtown, reconciling billing codes until my eyes blurred. Panic used to grip me at night, so I would walk the Willamette's edge, listening to the river push itself forward, steady even when I wasn't. I told myself if the river could keep moving, so could I. Cassia grew with that current. She wanted violin lessons, and I paid. She wanted summer camp at the UO Craft Center, and I found a way, clipping coupons, cooking from the discount aisle. She smiled at recitals, waving to Bryony in the crowd, though it was my overtime that kept the bow in her hand. After her wedding, the requests began with words like temporary and just until next Friday, a deposit for utilities when Graham's paycheck was late, bridge money for a trip up I-5 to a Portland showroom, gas too tight to risk. I sent transfers without hesitation, telling myself this was what mothers did. Bryony, meanwhile, arrived with gestures the camera loved: spa vouchers, engraved frames, jewelry boxes wrapped in ribbon. At birthdays, she basked in the spotlight of gratitude, while I stood with the receipts folded neatly in my purse. What I paid kept the lights on. What she gave could be displayed. One evening, Nora Vang leaned on the fence between our bungalows, listening as I recounted another emergency. She tilted her head. "Alawan, why does your temporary help have a calendar?" Her words landed like a stone dropped in still water, rippling long after she returned inside. I kept smiling, kept paying, but a part of me began to count in secret. Each dollar another mark in a story no one else seemed willing to read. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the brass key resting beside my laptop, and opened my online banking portal. The numbers scrolled backward like a trail of crumbs, each transfer neatly labeled in my own hand. Groceries, gas, rent gap, daycare. The oldest ones were nearly 4 years old, and yet each one felt as sharp as yesterday. I began to print. Page after page fed from the tray, stacking beside me in a pile that grew heavier than it should have. I highlighted the notes, circled dates when 2 or 3 requests had landed in the same week. When I finally added the totals, the number glared back 29 624ers. I expected to feel anger, but what settled in me was something flatter, hollower, depletion, like a well drawn down past its spring. As the printer hummed, I remembered the Thanksgiving when Aunt Rita asked about the new water heater. Cassia had turned to Bryony with admiration, and Bryony, gracious as ever, smiled as though she had written the check. I had stayed silent, though the $480 charge sat on my credit card, accruing interest while I ate pumpkin pie. The applause belonged to her. The bill belonged to me. I gathered the pages into order and slipped them into a grocery sack. The next afternoon, on my way home from work, I stopped at the store on 18th Avenue. I bypassed the bread aisle and found a cheap black binder, the kind students use for introductory classes. Plastic sleeves hung nearby, and I bought a pack. Sliding the pages inside as soon as I reached home, the binder closed with a snap that felt final. I placed it upright on the counter, its spine blank, but the weight inside undeniable. It was not yet an argument, not yet a weapon. It was a record, one I could no longer keep tucked away in my memory alone. I traced the edge with my finger, steadying myself. The truth was printed now, waiting for the moment I would decide whether to hide it or carry it into the next room where laughter had once drowned me out. The next week, I found myself at a charity planning meeting in South Eugene. One of those gatherings where folding tables were draped in floral cloths and clipboards were passed as if they held the world's decisions. Bryony swept in late, a silk scarf trailing behind her, and kissed the air near my cheek as though we were old friends. Elowen. Lovely as always, she said, her voice wrapped in honey. Then, with a tilt of her head, she added, we all help in different ways. Some of us keep standards. I smiled, the polite kind that held my teeth in place. Around us, women scribbled notes about raffle baskets and silent auctions. Bryony's role was always clear. She offered the flourish, the public face, while others carried the weight behind the curtain. Later that evening, at Cassia's, Bryony presented a velvet box with the flourish of a stage actress. Inside lay earrings she called heirlooms. Cassia gasped, brushing them against her cheek as though they carried generations. I turned the box slightly, recognizing the department store clasp still taped inside. Bryony called it family tradition, and no one corrected her. Graham, standing off to the side, leaned toward me as the applause circled Bryony. Mom doesn't do bills, he murmured. She hosts, organizes. That's her gift. I studied him, wondering if he believed it or simply needed to. The next day, Cassia called in tears. Her internet had been cut off, and without it, her boutique scheduling system couldn't run. I listened, then surprised myself by saying, let's ask your mother-in-law to split the payment. She values appearances, surely she'll want your work to shine. I called Bryony that evening. She laughed lightly, the kind that dismissed without malice. Oh, Elowen, you know my strengths. I'm hopeless with accounts, but I'll bring Cassia a fresh bouquet to lift her spirits. The line clicked off, leaving me with the quiet. I hung up, staring at the binder on my counter, its black spine mute but pressing. The next morning, Cassia sent me a screenshot of her overdue notice, waiting for me to fix it as I always had. Cassia called it a budget talk, the words too light for the tension they carried. I drove across the river that Wednesday evening, the binder strapped shut in the passenger seat like a witness no one had asked for. Inside, the dining table was covered with opened envelopes, electric, gas, cell phone, each one tilted toward me as if I already knew my part. Graham sat stiff in his chair, tapping a pen against the wood. Cassia leaned forward, her voice almost cheerful. "We've been thinking," she said. "It makes sense for us all to contribute monthly, just until things stabilize. A family plan. You could set up an automatic transfer, something steady." I placed the binder on the table and slid it toward her. "Before we talk about new plans, we should look at the old ones." She blinked, then flipped through the first few pages. Her expression didn't shift. "What money? You never gave us anything substantial." The room tilted. Graham glanced at me, then down at his hands. Cassia pressed the speakerphone button on her cell. Bryony's voice filled the room. "Smooth as silk, really. Allowin'. It's unseemly to keep books between family. We all give in our ways. Why embarrass yourself with numbers?" I looked from the phone to my daughter, my voice steady. "If I'm not good enough for your respect, then tell your mother-in-law to pay the bills." Cassia's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. I closed the binder with a quiet snap. No more monthly transfers. No more emergencies disguised as favors. If you need help, you ask in advance, and you accept no for an answer. The silence that followed was thick, heavy enough to press against my chest. Bryony coughed lightly on the other end of the line, as though waiting for me to soften. I didn't. When I finally stood, I left the binder on the table. It was no longer mine to carry alone. The door shut behind me, and I knew the echo of that snap would follow me home. The fallout arrived faster than I expected. 2 days after the binder snapped shut, Bryony's name appeared on my screen, tagged in a Facebook post, dripping with virtue. "Raising kids is hard when they forget gratitude," she'd written, followed by a string of praying hands. The comments came quickly. Women from South Eugene, church friends, neighbors I barely knew. So true. Stay strong. Hearts and thumbs stacked up under her name while my own stayed silent. The group texts came next. Aunts, cousins, family friends looped together in a storm of words. Why so unkind? Why shame your daughter family isn't about ledgers? Elowen. I scrolled through them late at night. The screen's glow bright against my wall. Each line rewriting the story until I almost doubted myself. Then the mail brought it back into focus. A window envelope with Cassia's name but my old address. I tore it open before realizing the power company. Past due. Balance printed bold. I slipped the paper into another envelope, wrote her current address in careful letters, and sent it back. No note. No check. A week later, the same account still sat unpaid. Nora found me staring at the mailbox one evening and asked if I'd eaten. I told her about the notice. She nodded, then suggested we drive downtown. At the Lane County Courthouse, we stood together in the self-help window line. The clerk listened as I asked about financial boundaries, about what counted as exploitation when the giver was a parent. She didn't hand me forms to sue. Instead, she slid across pamphlets on rights, limits, the shape of consent in family finances. I tucked them into my bag like armor. Back home, the dining table felt bigger than it used to. My chair pulled in and unused. The silence around it was sharp, but also clean, the kind that let me hear my own breathing without interruption. I sat there for a long while, the brass key warm in my palm, and understood that losing a seat at their table did not mean losing my ground. By the end of the month, the cracks showed. Cassia's boutique site went down without warning, her internet suspended after 2 missed payments. The messages she sent me were frantic, a blur of exclamation points and half-formed pleas. Without the system, she couldn't confirm appointments or schedule orders. Customers drifted to other shops, and her panic spilled over the phone line. Graham came by my bungalow one evening, shoulders tight in his sport coat, though it was too warm for layers. He tried to sound calm, but his words stumbled. "I figured you'd step in, honestly. We never planned a strict budget. We assumed you'd, well, cover gaps." He shifted under my silence, finally adding, "Cassia depends on that business. If the bills don't clear, She'll lose her reputation. The next day, Bryony called, her voice composed as ever. She offered to rebrand Cassia online, to polish her image, even to arrange a styled photo shoot at the public market. When I asked about paying off the arrears, her tone cooled. I don't manage accounts. Allowan, my strength is visibility. Let me do what I do best. Cassia's fear sharpened into anger. She'll always think I'm small, she said, pacing in her kitchen. If I can't keep up, she'll say I'm nothing. For the first time, her insecurity showed raw beneath the surface. I slid a paper across the table, a written offer I had drafted the night before. A one-time matched savings plan for every dollar Cassia saved. I would match it, but all payments would go directly to vendors, never to her hands. Clear milestones, firm dates. She scanned it quickly, then pushed it back. You don't trust me. This makes me look weak. No, I said gently. It makes you accountable. Her eyes filled, though she blinked them dry. She folded her arms and turned away, leaving the paper untouched on the counter. I picked it up, tucked it back into my bag, and walked out into the fading light, certain that my offer had been heard even if it had not been accepted. I made an appointment with Ariella Mendel, an attorney whose office sat in a modest brick building just off Oak Street. She was younger than I expected, brisk but patient, the kind of person who asked direct questions and waited for plain answers. I told her I wanted something small, practical, a way to ensure that whatever I left behind would not vanish into excuses or disappear through guilt. Together, we drafted a simple will. Nothing grand, just the bungalow, a handful of savings, and the items that carried weight because they had been earned. She guided me through setting up a modest education trust, not for Cassia, but for any future grandchildren who might one day need a foundation steadier than promises. My condition was clear. Any aid, now or later, must be paid directly to the vendor, documented, and never filtered through the fragile trust of family politics. Ariella nodded as though she had heard it all before. That evening, I came home and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I deleted every recurring Zelle template. One by one, the names and labels disappearing from my screen. In their place, I created a new transfer automatic, same dates as before, but this time into my own savings account. The numbers slid across the screen like breath filling my lungs. The next morning, I bought a locking file cabinet and placed it against the wall near my front window that overlooked Skinner Butte. Into its drawer, I laid the signed will, the trust documents, and a photocopy of Ariella's cover letter on top of the stack. I set the brass key that had never left my pocket, polished from years of handling. When the cabinet door clicked shut, it sounded like a seal pressed against both past and future. A hinge turned in my favor. We met at Hendricks Park on a gray morning, the rhododendrons heavy with dew. Cassia walked quickly, her arms folded, her words sharper than the air. You've made me look small, she said without preamble. Bryony sees everything. She thinks I can't manage, that I'm unworthy. You've proved her right. I kept my pace even, the gravel crunching beneath us. No, Cassia, I didn't prove anything. I paid so you could pretend she did. Her face tightened, the words landing harder than she wanted to admit. She stopped by a bench, staring at the ground. Her approval is the only scoreboard I have. If I lose that, I lose everything. I sat down, letting her stand above me. You don't need to lose it. You need to stop living by it. I'll make the same offer as before, 3 months of vendor-paid assistance. Rent, internet, essentials. But it requires a written budget. And you submit it. No middlemen. No pretending. Cassia shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again. You make it sound like I'm incompetent. If Bryony finds out, she'll think I failed. "You're not failing by being accountable," I said. "You're failing if you hide behind her shadow." She sank onto the bench beside me, voice breaking low. "I don't know if I can do it. I don't even know if I want to try. She'll just twist it, then take time," I said gently. I reached into my bag and handed her an envelope, not money, but a packet I had printed community resources, budgeting templates, numbers to call. She held it without opening, staring at the paper as though it weighed more than it should. I left it in her hands, stood, and started back toward the path. The air smelled of wet earth, the kind that promised growth if given patience. The first shift came quietly. Cassia sent me a text with a photo of a late fee notice, followed by a short message. "Graham and I want to try the plan. For the first time." She didn't ask for cash. She asked for the structure I had placed in front of her weeks earlier. I agreed. Nothing more, nothing less. Bryony's silence followed soon after. Her posts on gratitude and sacrifice stopped appearing, her voice withdrawing from the stage she had built. I heard through Graham that she was displeased, but she did not call me. I took her silence as its own kind of boundary. On a quiet Sunday, I walked along the Willamette, the river steady and sure beneath the late afternoon light. I bought myself a bouquet at the Saturday market, bright flowers I would have once considered unnecessary. At home, their color filled the kitchen, proof that small joys were worth the price. The next week, I filed the updated will and the education trust with Ariella's office. Back in my bungalow, I moved the binder to the back of the locked cabinet. It no longer needed to sit on the counter, heavy with accusation. It was not a weapon anymore, only a record. I sat with Nora over coffee, telling her what had settled in me. Family is not the people who clap the loudest, I said. It is the people who pay in respect, who speak in receipts when the truth requires it. That night, I turned the brass key over in my palm, then set it back on the cabinet. My door would remain unlocked for conversations, but locked for withdrawals. When you finally stop paying for the story that erases you, what new chapter will you fund with dignity first?